Okay, so we've landed a freelance project. How do we make sure it ends up being a huge success? We're going to look today at key skills like communication, understanding the project, creating a project file we can work off of. All that and more today on Success in RPGs. In episode 14, we talked about how to make sure we can land a project, right? To be a successful freelancer, we need projects. So we need to put ourselves out there where we can find projects, be aware of them, and now we're getting work. And we want to know as projects come our way, whether they are good projects or bad projects. So we covered all that in the last video. And now we have a project. We've decided it's great. We're excited about it. We need to know how to start. And I think that beginning of the project is a really valuable time. You never get, sort of like you never get a first impression, except the first time. It's like that with a project. You see it first. In a new way, you're opening up the wrapper of that project to look at it and see what really is it that I have to do. Once you start working on it, it becomes like a thing you know or think you know. So it's really important to stop and at the beginning, take that project in and get set up so that it's going to be successful, right? So we're going to do a number of things before we even start working on the project itself to set ourselves up for success. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we understand the project. And we talked about in the last video, episode 14, we talked about understanding the project from the perspective of what's being asked for us. Is this a good project? Does it meet our goals? Does it work with what we've said we want to do in this industry, right? But now we want to understand the project in terms of what we need to deliver upon, right? So I like to go through all of the communications, all of the files that may have been sent my way, and put that into my own language that I understand. This is usually different than the next step I'm going to talk about. This is really a constraints of the project, right? I'm going to write 10 magic items, and they need to do these kinds of things, right? Sometimes the project manager will give you really, really clear instructions. So you know exactly what you need to do, and they give it to you in one file, and that's your file, and that's great. But a lot of times, there's some information in an email, information in a project file, and then this other project file, and then they told you something during a meeting that was important. I put that all into one file so that I understand the project both now, before I begin, and if I ever get a question. As a freelancer, we may be doing things like juggling several projects or juggling real life. I parent, I have a real job. And so it may be that all of a sudden my client, I have to do all this work and then, okay, yeah, back to the freelance project. What am I doing on this freelance project? I open up my project file and I know exactly, right? And that's how you know you're doing a good job at keeping a project file that captures all of these things, is because whenever you open that file, it answers all the questions you have. And if you somehow have a question that isn't answered by that file, you know that it's because this has not been information given to you before, and you need to go back and get that information, add it to the file, and get to the work. So that's step one. We make sure that we understand the project, and we are doing that by keeping one document that has all of this. So we've got a project file. Our second step is to create a working file. This is where we're actually going to do our writing. And I like to do something kind of rather, I think, different, which I'll share here. But it starts with first asking, are there any templates we need to use, right? We may need a certain type of file that we need to work in. Maybe it's on Google Docs that our work should be handed in, and the client's going to work on that. Maybe it's Word documents and there's a specific template we're going to be sent. Maybe we're doing our project work in whatever we'd like. We need to know that. Use any templates that are available. If we haven't asked if they use templates, it's always good to ask. It's kind of surprising how often they'll say, oh yeah, actually we do, or we've been meaning to create one, but here are the headings we use, and here are rules for how to create for our game. You need to, have only 3 heading types, and when you have a bulleted list, this is what it should do. And so if we need to apply styles to a document, any of that, we want templates. We set that up. That's the beginning of our working file. Now, the part that I do that's a little different is I will add at the very beginning of that document my personal goals for the project, which encapsulate or incorporate the goals that our client is using, right? Because we want to make sure for it to be successful, our project needs to hit all of their goals and our own goals. Let's take a look at some examples. So this is the actual project file that I used when working on the Flea Mortals MCDM monster book. I did change the price right before I screen captured this because maybe down the road they're paying something else and I don't want this to be dated information, but what they pay is pretty public. I just didn't want it to be outdated down the road. So you can see here that the first thing I did is, what are my project goals, right? I want to make really cool monsters. And that may seem obvious, but sometimes stating the obvious is empowering too. I want to show MCDM that I create monsters well, so that if they are writing monsters down the road for some project, they'll think of me and say, yeah, Teos made cool monsters. Let's bring them back, right? That's what I'm hopeful. Because the monsters in their book were like a new monster manual that wasn't just a D&D monster manual, but their monster manual, I wanted to draw inspiration that went back to the roots. So taking their goals, I made my own goal of draw from mythology and folklore to create innovative monsters, right? I wanted to create monsters that were simple, easy to run, so that DMs would have a lot of fun running them without feeling like they got lost and they didn't make them effective. Why? That's both good design. It's something that I struggle with. I tend to make things a little too complex, so I wanted to make sure to tell myself to do this. And if a DM is running the monster and it's effortless, they will feel better about MCDM's product. I'm thinking of my audience. Really, I have two audiences, right? I have MCDM that I'm trying to please, and I'm trying to please their customers. So it all feeds back into itself. And I wanted this work that I was doing on Flea Mortals to inform my steps or feed into what I was doing to create monsters overall, both as part of Patreon, where I keep a spreadsheet that has Patreon backers get the spreadsheet that walks through how to do a lot of different things in the game. And I wanted to flesh out the monster design portion. And so I thought, hey, as I'm learning through this project, I want to incorporate everything I'm doing, the process I'm following, into the spreadsheet to help other people create monsters. And I knew that I was looking at both monster powers and then later the Forge of Foes book that I ended up creating with Scott Fitzgerald and Mike Shea. I wanted my work here to also improve those efforts. So I was thinking about monster design on this larger level that would feed into other things that I'm doing as a freelancer and as my own publisher, right? Then I captured project overview information. So, this is the type of book they're creating, 305 monsters or over 300. The pay and, any information like they pay for rewrites, that's good to capture. There are templates provided, and so I'm going to use that. Workflow, I will send a draft by particular dates. James Intercastle is going to make revisions, and if needed, make suggestions for another round. After that optional second round, I can invoice. So I know exactly when I'm invoicing. MCDM is going to do revisions. They may do playtesting and editing. There's the possibility that I will do revisions, right? So if so, that's going on in the schedule. And then the scope. I'm working on the Hellhound. I'm working on the Minotaur, all of that down in the rest of the document. Below that is where I started my work, right? So this was always above where I was working. So I could always just quickly page up and go, okay, what are my goals? What am I doing? And here in this case, it's fairly simple, but other projects may have very specific things. And in fact, in the specific area where I worked on the monsters, like for example, the Hellhound, I had information from MCDM on like the roles of their monsters, right? And guidance for different things that I captured down below in the specific section for the monster. But in other projects, I might put it up here as well. So let's take a look at another example. Another MCDM project, it just happens to be my good examples. This is a capture of my project goals from the Kingdoms and Warfare book that I did with MCDM. I worked on their adventure, which was a sequel to the adventure in their Strongholds and Followers book. So I wanted to, top level, I'm providing an adventure that excites and pleases the backers of this project and MCDM. I want MCDM to think, yeah, Teos can write adventures. They're really cool and they hit the marks of what we do, right? That's important to me. I want to drive home the feel in this adventure of being in charge of a kingdom, because this is a book about running a kingdom and warfare. So you should feel that way. Make big decisions. The choices have visible impacts on your kingdom, on everything that's happening around your kingdom that impact your kingdom. Your design of your kingdom matters, right? So the adventure is playing off of the things, the choices you've made. Your enemies matter. Your alliances grant strength. Your people matter, right? Who is on your side matters, and what you do with them and how you behave, that's going to impact your people, your alliances. I wanted to evoke the feeling of media such as Game of Thrones, right? matters of state, alliances, enemies. The allies have demands. They don't just go, yeah, sure, you made a check. They've got demands before they work with you, and those may be difficult for you to go along with. There's an ally that's secretly a threat, a neutral entity that can go either way, enemies that can be neutralized or weakened, this kind of stuff. I want the adventure to not be hard to run, but feel rich and rewarding. There are choices to be made. An idea I had was that the seasons would change as a way of sort of tracking time and feeling tangibly that time is passing because it goes into winter and so on. And so different parts of the adventure being on specific seasons could give it that feel of, tangible change of time. That it's not hard to track. And all of this about not being hard is that's good design, but also things like low prep encounters, fun things, that all works given that there's a whole nother layer of rules on top of the normal adventure around your warfare turns. And then I wanted to speak a little bit to the first adventure, Strongholds and Followers, so that would shine, that if you played that first adventure, that's rewarded, right? You see the same NPCs, things play off of your previous choices, but it's not necessary. If you didn't play the first one, you're not penalized, but you are rewarded if you did. So that was a big part of the project goal, right? So I hope these two examples sort of help explain why, and we want to start with this working file that captures our goals, captures all of our important project information. And then we've got our separate document, like I said before, that captures timelines and things like that. That can be a separate document that we just look to every now and then. But this thing about the key of what we're doing with our project, and the first step is our project goals, always in our working document, so we can always just scroll up and see exactly what it is that we're supposed to be delivering on. The third thing we want to do before we begin our actual work is to track our timeline in some way. We want to have dates for our work. Ideally, the client is telling us the dates, so that's clear and we're both on the same page around timeline. But if there isn't, if it's just sort of do it and give it to me when you're done, we still should probably put down some expectations, communicate them to our client, and add them somewhere. So we take those dates that we know, like we're doing our rough draft and we're going to share that. We're doing maybe we're even sharing an outline before that or a one-page summary. So we put those dates. When is our final draft coming in? Or maybe there are revisions back by a certain date and then our final draft. And then maybe even some last changes after that, or a review and approval and sign off. And then great, the project is done. When are we invoicing, right? Things like that can all be good to capture in some method. So you've got a calendar software you use, or you've got a calendar book, whatever it is, find a way. If you're using software, you want to put in some notifications perhaps, right? So maybe you need 3 days before the first draft is due, you need a prompt that says, hey, make sure this is all done, right? And timelines are tricky as a freelancer because we have other things going on in our life, right? We may have relative birthdays, we may have vacations, we may have things that we do with the kids that we need to do, right? We're helping them get ready for something major in their lives, and it's going to take a lot of our time. So we've got to put this against our project timeline and make sure that both are still happening, and we're not disappearing from the world or calling up our employer and saying, yeah, I can't turn this in on time. So as an example, when I wrote Acquisitions Incorporated, there was a time where we had to, for 3 weeks in a row, write 10,000 words each week for different parts of the adventure. And in, I think, the second or third of those, I was traveling on an impromptu trip to Japan for work. So I had to do both, right? I have to write on the plane. I have to prepare presentations on the plane. And so I'm doing both tracks, getting it all done so that it happens, because that's the timeline, and you've got to prepare for it. If you like success in RPGs, I hope that you'll consider joining our Patreon community. There, you can be part of our Discord community. We discuss the latest happenings in the industry. We share each other's work and progress. We analyze what is taking place in the hobby and look at the latest products and events. So all of that took place before we even began to write, right? That's just setting ourselves up for a successful project. Now we actually start to do the process of writing, and we're going to start with an outline. How important an outline is really depends on how we approach writing. For me, outlines are really critical, and I do think that everybody can benefit from using an outline to some extent, though a lot of my friends and even family members find that they just can form a clear picture of something and just write and finish. In fact, on Mastering Dungeons, I was talking to a designer who works that way. Just flow and it's done. But for me, I find that for a project, I really need to outline what I'm going to do and think through the process, think through the steps at various levels, right? If it's an adventure, it's something like, well, in the introductory scene, these things are going to happen. These things will bring out the character background. In the first scene, here are the various points that'll happen. Here's what this scene's about. Here's the second scene, here's how you'll learn about the whatever. I'm outlining that all out so that I end up with a nice, good story or a nice, good book progress that's going to make sense to the reader, right? When I was working on, say, Acquisitions Incorporated and the franchise rules, outlining what are the goals of these rules, how am I going to express them, what are the different parts of them that will make it all come together. I find I need to outline and outline and outline. And in fact, my outlining is also part of my brainstorming, right? Where I'm thinking of good ideas and I'm discarding ideas, choosing the better things. I don't just see the end project. Maybe some folks do, but I don't just see that end project. I have to go through this iterative process of improving my ideas. Sometimes I outline and then I go for a walk. And in the woods, I'm thinking through it and just thinking, and then I come back and I outline again. Or another tactic that I like to take is to take just loose pieces of paper. I find that writing by hand somehow is helpful, even though my handwriting is horrible. I will take loose pieces of paper and I will just sketch ideas on them, write about things, right? So like I had an adventure once I wrote where I was at a swimming pool and there was this slide and I broke out paper because suddenly I was like, it could be really cool to have in an icy environment, sort of ice flows that you slide down onto the terrain. And I was watching my kids who are on these rafts and the rafts are sort of moving around. I'm thinking, and there could be like sort of ice chunks that are floating around that you jump off of. And so all of this, was happening at kind of an outline brainstorming level. And then I went and outlined that further and I had that scene figured out. And in the end, it ended up being a lot of fun, right? Outlining is something also that I come back to. Like my outline is not upfront and then I'm done and I just write. I go back to that outline and I re-outline. In fact, one of my favorite ways to deal with writer's block, which writer's block is an interesting thing. That's if you find you are having what you might call that, it's worth going in and doing some reading on what people think today about it. It is not generally about a muse magically getting you through it. You have to have some way to break through it. And usually it's just by writing. But one of the ways that I find I get rid of writer's block is by outlining. So I'll think, what am I writing here? And I'll go back to an outline, just bullet points, right? They're going to do this. They're going to do the other thing. This other thing will happen. And as I work through that, I start to understand. And now I can go back and write all of my words. So I find outlining to be just a critical part of my writing process on freelance projects. Similarly, playtesting. This is something that's really easy to forget when we are writing because we're so focused on the words, but we want to be able to playtest. Ideally, you are playtesting everything you create at the minimum level. If you feel really confident about your skills, about the role-playing game system, about everything creating, maybe you can just playtest key parts of it and leave the rest of playtesting to the person that's hiring you. But you want to make sure about that. With some cases like board games, the playtesting is rolled into it, usually, right? So they will expect from you some playtesting and they may pay you for that. It's worth asking if that's not on the table. But so when I designed for HeroQuest, for example, I would spend playtesting time to make sure that it all runs in the allotted time, that it plays smoothly, that there aren't any issues that the players hit that they suddenly go, wait, this doesn't work, right? Adventures, subsystems, especially class design, things like that. Like you want to be able to do that no matter what RPG it's like. And things like playtesting don't apply and some of this advice in this video doesn't apply when you're doing things like layout or cartography, but it can. For example, cartography is one that's fascinating to me because a lot of times I see these maps that are beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And they capture the scene in terms of like, yes, this is a jungle or it's a alleyway, but they may not actually work for play very well. Like, yeah, there's a jungle and a hut, but probably in combat, you would want to move around the hut and that's off the edge of the map. Or the alleyway, well, what about the street in front? If someone runs out of the alleyway, which actually happens in this adventure or could happen, can I get out there, right? So even a cartographer has reasons to think through the play testing, right? Now let's talk a little bit about one of the really important skills in a project. This often comes up when people say, how are you successful? It's, be on time, do great work. And one of them that often comes up is communicate. And it absolutely is important, but there are different kinds of communication, right? So part of communication is in making sure that you understand the projects. We've talked about that already, right? You understand it in terms of a contract level, you understand it in terms of the output, you understand it in terms of the goals for the project, right? So that by understanding all those things, we have less of a need for communication. But any questions that come up during that process, we need to communicate and say, hey, it's not clear to me what I need to do here, or are my goals correct? You kind of can't overshare as long as you're being mindful of the employer's time, right? So you need to be succinct in your communications. You don't want to eat up their time. You don't want to make this seem like working with you is high effort, but you do want to ask valid questions, necessary questions, and so that they know that you know what's needed on this project, right? The other thing you want to communicate on is progress. So as the project is taking place, you may want checkpoints, right? One thing that I found a lot of times on projects, especially ones involving a lot of people, where we all have like a meeting with everybody online or in a room, the employer will say what the project's about, but there are so many people that nobody feels like they can really say, wait, I don't really follow this, or I have a rough idea of what's happening, but I'm not entirely following. But the employer assumes everything must make sense because nobody's asking any questions. And you really do need to go back and ask those questions and in fact, try to get them fed to everybody so everybody's on the same page. Checkpoints are great because they are opportunities to see how things are going. And as long as you're not eating up too much of anyone's time and it's valuable, then it's really useful. So for example, if you're writing a subsystem, you might communicate with your employer and say, I developed these class roles or these character roles, and let's talk about what they're doing and how they're working. Does that all sound good? And they will give you feedback, which can then inform the evolution of your progress, and you can keep working and making good progress because you're getting this sort of feedback. And if you're a little bit off track, it's not going to be a shocker when you go and deliver everything, right? It's better to upfront have them say, well, here's what I like or don't like. The truth is they may have some things where they go like, well, I don't know if that's exactly what I want because I haven't seen it fully yet, but they are also able to give you some feedback, and there's some buy-in taking place where they are kind of saying like, yeah, okay, I understand what you're providing to me. I'll have to see the next step, but everybody's getting a little closer to where they both should be to like what they're going to see, right? So that kind of communication of check-ins is really valuable. It's not a bad idea to have a communication every X amount, right? However, depending on you look at the entirety of the project, cut in some places where you can touch base and see how things are going. Anytime there's a handoff, you expect communication return, right? If you turn in your outline, you turn in your rough draft, you turn in the final, like you want communication back on how that went. The end can often be one where the client doesn't have time to give you feedback. So I will often solicit feedback like, hey, this to me was a great project. Was it good for you? Is there anything that could be better in next time that we work together? Any suggestions on ways I can write differently to be better for you? Any of those kinds of questions I've often asked to create this sort of back and forth communication where they are giving me that feedback and I can work off of it. Communication also sometimes comes up in a little bit of tough situations like I'm not going to be able to meet a deadline, right? If that's the case, then you want to explain why. And one thing I've found, and this will happen to anybody, right? Anybody will have to have these kinds of communications. It happens in all kinds of jobs. It's going to happen in freelance too. And what I've often found is that it's really important to capture that in writing and say back to the person, thank you so much for the conversation today. As we discussed, I will now provide this on this particular date. Because they may be going so quickly that they forget what the new date is, right? So establishing that in writing is really important so there's a record of it that you can go back to. Like, yep, you said I could do that by this date. That's our new date. We're all on the same page. When we're communicating and we hear something back that maybe we don't quite agree with, we want to go into listening mode and understanding mode. So one way to be a successful freelancer is that when a tough moment comes up where we don't quite see eye to eye, or we are being told something we don't quite like, we are going to be the kind of people who are going to listen and understand it. Really seek not to fight it, but to understand it. Okay, you don't like this design. Where is that coming from? What is the particular piece that isn't liked? Because what I'm writing is for that employer, right? So I want to understand exactly what's not working and write to what they need and what they want. Almost always, we should be able to find something really cool about what the client wants. So whatever our initial deal was, we can forget that, right? Like if it's not useful to the client, we want to find what they want and off of that, create something awesome. So that's an important part of communication, developing that ability to just listen and pull out rather than create barriers, right? Absorb, be in sponge mode rather than barrier mode and say, okay, help me really understand what you like and don't like about this. And if I change this part, are you happier, or this other part, right? And through that, we can get to a place where the client will see that we're working hard to get to where they want to be. And that will get us more work down the road. It'll also mean it's a project they want to talk about. They want to talk about our role in it and all of that. If we create barriers, then it's like, well, I don't know, maybe I should say yes to the freelancer, but it's not what we want. You don't want to be in that kind of situation. 3 other quick ones. Roles, understand the roles of everybody in the project, right? So it may be that someone is speaking to you about what the project goals are, but then, and what you're going to do, and then you're going to hand it in to an editor, not that original person. And the editor is going to give you feedback, or the developer is going to develop it for you. And you may or may not be told exactly what's changed, but that's where it's going to. So understanding those roles of what everybody's playing on the project. Someone who's doing layout will contact you and tell you what you're writing, right? If you are that layout person, right? You are going to receive something, and then it should go into layout, and then it should not be changing anymore, right? But that needs to be clear, right? You are the editor, so you are going to receive that work. You're going to edit it. Maybe you point out a few things where you need them to make changes. Like, I need you to cut some of this, right? Choose one of these paragraphs to cut. I need to take 2 powers off of each monster, or whatever it is that you fit that space. All of that, understanding the roles of everybody in the project and being cool with that, working with them effectively, that's a key to success. Formats. So if there are particular formats that they expect, templates that you're following, word choices, right? Like understanding the couple of ways that you do magic items in 5th edition D&D and how they say that when the power refreshes, right? How to understand how to write that out. Know that format, because if you just come up with your own, you're not following what's expected by the reader and by your employer. Word counts, really important, right? So if someone says to you, this is a 10,000 word piece, you can't hand in 5,000 and you can't hand in 15,000. Sometimes we are short. We must think through how to fill it in a valuable way. And that may be a reason for communication. I'm a little lean on my words. Can you help me think through what else you'd want in this section? Here's what I've covered so far, right? Or here's what the mechanic does. What else should we do with it? Maybe it's examples of play. Maybe it's this, that, and the other. What interests you, so we're on the same page. And it doesn't feel like, oh, I thought the whole system would be X words, not these examples of play, right? We want to be communicating through that. If we're going to go over, one option I've sometimes done, it's the easiest, is first we want to look and see, are there extraneous words? Like, are we wordy and this should just be cut down? Do that. But if it's because there's just so much cool stuff here, one thing we can often do is say, okay, what are the parts that are least critical to this that then we could put in as optional, flag them as optional, and those can be easily cut by the editor or the person that we're handing our work into, right? So I remember I once wrote for Dragon Magazine back in the DDI 4E days, and I went a little long on something, but that whole last part could be cut, and then it was the actual word count. So I said, if you want to keep this in, it's X words. If we take that part out, it hits the word count. And they left it in, right? But layout can drive that they may not want to do that, right? On a monster, you give me some really cool lore, but the monster needs to be 1 page or half a page. And so that's just the way it is, and they may not use what you add. But by thinking that way and really obeying the principle of that word count, we come out ahead. We help our employer. We're going to be more successful. The last thing I want to share is the idea of keeping a file where you log all of your lessons learned. And it may be more than one file. So it could be, for example, maybe you're working on a particular role-playing game and you want to keep a file that is all the collected lessons you've learned about writing for that game, right? When I'm writing For the systems for using skills, here's the language I should always use. Ooh, make sure not to say the following thing because that is not a thing they like to see in the language of the game. When I write this kind of adventure, here's what I should do, right? So things that are specific to the format of that game, then maybe that deserves a file. Like I have a giant file because I work so much on 5th edition, giant file on 5th edition language to follow and format to use and so on. Then I have a separate file that is just larger project lessons that I've learned and things to do, things for myself to employ, right? And idea files. So there may be ideas I didn't use on a project because I didn't give it to the employer. Those are still my ideas. They didn't go there. They didn't end up there at all. So then I think about that and I have giant idea files and future project files and things like that that are based on this, adding all of my lessons that I've learned and trying to pivot off of this, right? So like if we hit some barrier where, boy, we didn't track our schedule well, okay, what are we gonna do next time, right? What are the lessons learned on how to do better scheduling, better timeliness, and so on? Did you forget to invoice? Why, right? Like, why did that happen? Why was there a delay between your handing in and the invoicing? Figure out how to make that process really smooth. Did you fail to hit a deadline? Okay, did we communicate the right way? You spend some time thinking through that, right? Did I handle that the right way? Was it clear? Was it then something we both could look at the email and know that there was this new timeline we'd agreed upon and it all worked fine? Make sure that that's in place so that you're getting better with every single project. So there are a lot of things that can work into successful projects. This is, I think, captured the most important of the large kind of things that any one of us can take on and do to organize, set ourselves up for better success on freelance projects. But I want to write through a few things that I keep as sort of a list of key skills for success. So one is writing, constantly improving our grammar, our word choice, our flow. We want to work through that to get better, be better and better writers if that's our key skill. If our key skill is layout or editing, then it might slightly change, right? Cartography, right? It's those tools that you want to work on. So the tools of your trade, in my case, it's writing. We want to really be constantly improving those skills. You can't get past that, right? It will always be helpful to do that. Communication, collaborating well, right? Being a healthy person for others to work with, compassionate to others, right? Understanding of others, speaking with emotional intelligence, working well with other people on the project, right? You have a conference call and someone's got their baby that they need to tend to, right? Having that understanding and compassion for other people makes for better projects. Understanding the goals of the project and of your creator. Treating your client well, right? With respect, being friendly, creating relationships, right? You want to work for somebody and then be able to meet them at some event, a convention or something like that, and want to hang out with them. And they want to hang out with you, right? Caring about your work, right? And what it should accomplish. Seeing how an adventure you write, a layout you set up, how that makes life better for the person that receives it, right? A great map just brings an encounter to life, right? Great artwork causes just that book to be such a pleasure to read, right? Marketing. Part of any project is thinking about how you can talk to others about what you did and put yourself out there effectively, right? I did this work for this person. I can do that work for you, and being able to work off of that. Networking, sharing good ideas, sharing lessons you learned from projects, right? All of these things will help you be successful with other projects. As we've talked about before, being part of a community of creators that are of like mind and sort of like place in the hobby, right? You can then share how you handled situations. They will share how they handled situations, and you will improve together so that you're both having more successful freelance projects, right? And those relationships and your championing of good ways to work, that will all improve the hobby and improve your place within it, right? One way to look at it is you're leaving it better than you found it, right? Any project, any interaction, you want to make the person's life better, right? Make the employer's life better, the client's life better, the audience that is going to use the book or other creation of yours, that their day is better for having looked at that, right? If you're doing those things, you're going to have successful freelance projects and be in a better place and a healthier place as a creator. So I hope this has been helpful. Leave me some feedback down below if you would, and click that like and subscribe and all that. But if you would, give me feedback on what's helpful about the series, what you'd like me to see covering in Success in RPGs. And I'll see you next time on Success in RPGs.